Before this video starts, I'd just like to plug my Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, you get early ad-free access to all videos, and higher tiers get their name on the screen and a shout-out at the end of each video. Videos will also be mostly uncensored on there too, so if that interests you, click the link in the description or the pinned comment. The Dating Game was primarily an American TV show that spawned imitators around the globe. The concept is very simple. An eligible singleton, usually a woman, comes on the show searching for love and through a series of rounds, narrows down a pool of contestants or eligible bachelors before choosing which ones to go on a date with. Rodney Alcala would appear on an episode of The Dating Game in September of 1978. During the episode, he was thoroughly charming.
And we're going to start by having them say hello to you and see how they sound. Number one, would you say hello to Cheryl, please?
We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl.
Okay, number two.
Hi, Cheryl. It's nice to almost meet you.
And number three.
Cheryl. Hello.
Bachelor number one.
Yes?
What's your best time?
The best time is at night. Nighttime.
Why do you say that?
Because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good. Then you're really ready.
And ended up being the chosen suitor by the eligible bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw.
Now, this is your date, and I want to tell you something about him, Cheryl. He's a skydiver, so he's got a lot of nerve. He's into motorcycling. He's also a fine photographer. Say hello to Rodney Alcala. Rodney, come on and say hello. Congratulations, Rod. You did it with a one answer.
Despite winning the show, when the cameras stopped rolling, Cheryl Bradshaw found Rodney to be unnerving and a little creepy backstage, and declined to ever go on the promised date with him. Little did she know that this decision may well have saved her life, since the man she turned down would go on to become known as the Dating Game Killer. It would be only 2 years after the show that Rodney Alcala would find himself convicted of the murder of a 12-year-old girl and suspected of more. Born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala, he would adopt the name Rodney James Alcala for most of his life, but sometimes utilize other aliases. In the end, while he would be convicted of 5 murders, authorities were fairly sure that the actual number of victims was substantially higher. The top end of the speculation puts the number of possible victims up over 100. Born in Texas along with his parents and 3 siblings, they would move to Mexico when he was 8. His father would abandon the family a few years after, and Rodney would move to LA with his mother and siblings. His upbringing, aside from this, seemed relatively successful and happy. He joined the army where some of his issues would begin to emerge. Despite being described as exceptionally intelligent, there would be a raft of disciplinary issues and repeated incidents with women that would plague his short career. He would suffer from a mental break and then go AWOL, after which he was discharged on mental grounds due to multiple mental issues. Rodney would then go on to graduate from UCLA, but this would be where his more criminal tendencies began to show themselves. Towards the end of 1968, he would lure an 8-year-old girl into his car and then onto his residence, where he would physically assault her. His young victim barely survived and was in a coma for over a month. 3 years later, Rodney would rape and murder a 23-year-old woman named Cornelia Crilly, although this would not be linked to him for decades after the fact. By this time, he was already on the FBI's most wanted list and was arrested after being recognized by 2 young girls at his camp that he was working at as a counselor. However, the family of the 8-year-old girl that he had attacked had moved out of the country and refused to return to the US to testify in the case against him. As such, he faced a reduced charge of child molestation, for which he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. After his release, he was arrested mere months after gaining his freedom for molesting another young girl. For this offense, he served 2 years and was registered as a sex offender. Once he was released again, Rodney traveled to New York City, where he murdered Ellen Jane Harbour, another crime that was not linked to him initially at the time. A key piece of evidence in this case would be a note in the diary that she left, which stated that she was planning to meet a man by the name of one of Rodney's aliases on the day she disappeared. This was intended to be a photo shoot, which by now had become his most common ruse and cover story. He managed to convince an untold number of people, both male and female, that he was a fashion photographer, and took photographs of hundreds of subjects, some under the age of 18, and some nude. It was during this period in 1978 that he made his appearance on The Dating Game, in the middle of his ongoing crime spree and while he was a registered sex offender. When the law eventually caught up to Rodney and revealed the extent of his crimes, his appearance on the show caused outrage and thus led to his nickname, the Dating Game Killer. He would eventually stand accused of 5 known killings, each of them with sexual elements, when he was arrested in July of 1979. The victims were aged between 12 and 32. In May of 1980, he was convicted of all counts and sentenced to death. While this verdict was briefly overturned due to the jury being told about his previous sexual convictions at the murder trial, the retrial resulted in the same verdict. In the years between this conviction and his eventual death in custody of a heart attack in 2021, there were multiple retrials, further charges sought, and potential links probed to other unsolved cases. Francois Vero's appearance on a TV show on May 23, 2019 would not raise any eyebrows at the time, but like many of the other cases that we are looking at today, it was only after the fact that it would be seen in a darker light. The title of the TV show was Tout le monde veut prendre sa place, which translates to Everyone Wants to Take His Place. While it is probable that Rodney Alcala is the most infamous and well-known of the cases in this video, it may surprise you to learn that Francois made his TV appearance while actively on the run from the authorities. On the show, he showed no sign of nerves or suspicion, openly discussing his previous occupations, where he was a member of the police force in various locations around France, and spoke about working in a notorious park of Paris, where he, quote, kept people safe. In 2021, Vero would take his own life while under investigation from the authorities. A DNA sample from a previously unresolved case was being probed with modern technology, and the investigation narrowed down the suspects to active service members of law enforcement in that specific area and time, of which Francois was one. In the note that he left behind, he would confess to a number of killings over the years, all of which have remained unsolved, but have been attributed to a serial killer known as the Pockmarked Killer. The unknown person had been linked to 9 murders and around 30 instances of rape and other forms of abuse. His wife claimed that she had no idea that he had carried out these acts, and his former colleagues also expressed shock, saying that there were no indications that he was capable of these acts. However, when the cold case team began to dig into these unresolved cases from the 80s, they came to the conclusion that the killer was a Paris-based constable. They sent requests to around 750 former members of the force in order to compare their DNA, and when he received this request, Francois instantly fled and ended his own life. The letter that he left behind spoke of a mad rage that had turned him to these terrible acts, but claimed that he had been defeated by 1997, when the killings and rape stopped. An only child, he was born in January 1962, and his mother would pass away shortly after his birth. This meant he was raised initially by his father, who he described as strict, and would later claim that he had sexually abused him. Francois would be a dark and brooding teenager, plagued by suicidal thoughts and enjoying horror films. After marrying in 1985 and joining the National Police Force, he would be employed in various iterations of the force through the rest of his career until his retirement in 2019. But the quiet rage would manifest early as Francois attacked, assaulted, and then tried to murder an 8-year-old in April of 1986, though she would survive. The same year, he would similarly assault an 11-year-old girl named Cecile, but would kill her after the fact. Witnesses that saw him with her described the pop marks on his skin, which would lead to the nickname that the unknown killer got. The murder of Cecile Bloch would ultimately be the case where the DNA recovered at the scene was to be compared to the serving constable from that time. The next year, in 1987, he would torture and kill an adult couple named Giles Pulte and Irmgard Muller. That same year, a 14-year-old girl would be handcuffed and sexually assaulted by a police officer. She would survive the encounter and also describe the pop-marked skin. DNA evidence linked the cases, and the pop-marked killer had another case attributed to him. 3 years later, in 1990, he shot and killed a 43-year-old man named Gilbert, although this would not be linked to him until 2024, when ballistics experts confirmed that a weapon found in Vero's possession was the same one that's been used to carry out the murder. An 11-year-old girl was attacked in 1994 by Francois when he identified himself as police, forced her into his car, and then attacked her for hours before abandoning her. Again, her witness testimony led to the case being associated with the pop-marked killer. Even after his death, his confession letter, and the DNA confirmations, the number of unsolved rapes and murders that have been potentially linked to Vero are suspected to be anywhere from 5 upwards to 30. When Edward Wayne Edwards appeared on 2 TV shows in 1972, there was no suggestion at all that he had a clean past. In fact, he was there to talk about his previous criminality and a book he had written about his life up to that point. In his appearance on To Tell the Truth, he told of his past as a criminal and how he had turned his life around, as documented in his book, and he states that despite his many dealings with the law, he had never killed anyone. It would become clear after the fact that he was not as reformed as he claimed to be, and it would actually be his second book that played a key role in his eventual arrest. Edward's daughter, April Ballistico, would end up writing a book titled Raised by a Serial Killer, and as well as recounting her childhood and her upbringing, it would also speak of the events that led up to her contacting the police in 2009 when a podcast covering an unsolved murder gave her the inclination that her father might have been responsible. Edward Wayne Edwards was born in June 1933 and had a rough upbringing in an orphanage that led him towards a life of petty crime. At least according to him, he was released from juvenile detention and then would join the Marines, where he would eventually be dishonorably discharged due to going absent without leave. During his life, he worked a number of varied and differing jobs, most of which saw him moving frequently and traveling from state to state. The one constant in his life seemed to be his propensity towards breaking the law, and it would see him spending relatively short stints in prison in various locations over the years. While in prison in 1955, he escaped and then embarked on a crime spree where he predominantly robbed gas stations. Over the next few years, he would continue to be arrested and incarcerated for crimes, and then either released or escaped from custody. After making an appearance on the FBI's most wanted list, he would be returned to prison in 1962 and remained there for 5 years until he was paroled. This was the time of his life where he claimed that he would turn his life around, and upon his release, he wrote a book about his life and made his appearance on To Tell the Truth and What's My Line. During this time of apparent stability, he would also get married, but this stage of his life would come to an end in the early 1980s when he would be sent back to prison for arson, serving 2 years. What wasn't known at the time was that 5 years after his TV appearances and book releases, Edwards had progressed to murder. In 1977, he would commit a double murder in Ohio, killing a young couple aged 21 and 18 and hiding their bodies in nearby weeds, where they were found the next day by law enforcement. The cause of death was determined to be shotgun wounds. 3 years later, in 1980, he would commit what would become known as the Sweetheart Murders, where he killed a couple named Tim Hack and Kelly Drew. They were only 19 and 20 when Edwards murdered them via stabbing and strangulation. While he was questioned about this last killing, there was not enough evidence of his involvement to hold him, and he was released. It would be 2009 before his daughter, April, heard a podcast covering the Sweetheart Murders, and she realized it could be her father that was responsible. After her tip-off, police arrested him in Louisville, Kentucky. It wouldn't be long before he confessed not only to the Sweetheart Murders, but the previously unsolved Ohio double murder mentioned previously. While incarcerated, he would also admit to murdering his own foster son, 24-year-old Danny Boy Edwards, in 1996. The younger Edwards had been in the army, but was convinced to go AWOL by his father, who then took him to the woods and shot and killed him. The body would be discovered by a hunter the next day, and Edward collected on a substantial life insurance policy as a result of the death, with no suspicion ever coming his way. On March 8, 2011, he was sentenced to death in Ohio. He was due to be executed on August 31st, but died on April 7th from natural causes. As the name might suggest, Bullseye is a UK show that centres around the sport of darts. The format combined pairs of contestants to answer questions and throw darts in a mix of general knowledge and questionable sporting ability. Most famously hosted by Jim Bowen, it was a staple of British game show TV, with the mascot firmly cemented in the culture, and aspects of the show, such as Bully's special prize being a speedboat, outliving the original show run and bringing it back in a modern format, hosted by ex-cricketer Freddie Flintoff. And while there have been innumerable contestants over the years, there was one whose episode of the show passed without any notable event, who would later be proven to be one of the worst people to have ever graced the small screen. John William Cooper was born on September 3, 1944, in Pembrokeshire, Wales. As he grew into a young man, he would have interactions with law enforcement from his teenage years and beyond. By the time he was 21, he had been arrested and charged with stealing a car, various offences related to alcohol consumption, and assault, as well as having assaulted an officer. His luck would seem to take a turn for the better in his 30s, however, when he won a substantial amount of money in a newspaper competition, a sum equivalent to around £250,000 in today's money. For a man who had been working as a farm labourer at the time, it should have been life-changing, and it certainly was, but not for the better. His drinking and gambling escalated, as well as his propensity for violence, getting into scuffles with locals as he drank and frittered away the money, bit by bit, in the bookmakers. It would take less than a decade for the money to disappear, and then John, seemingly unwilling to give up his current lifestyle, resorted to crime to get more money. Starting in 1985, he would carry out a series of often violent home robberies, multiple of which resulted in injury or death of the occupants. Towards the end of 85, he would attack and kill Richard and Helen Thomas, two siblings, inside of their home, before robbing it and setting a fire to cover his tracks. 4 years later, he would attack and kill a couple who were on holiday by first tying them up and then taking their cash. He would then force them to hand over their bank cards as well as their PIN numbers to get more money out at a later date. Despite complying with all of his demands, he would shoot and kill them anyway. What no one at the time knew was that only 1 month before his second double murder, he appeared on Bullseye as a contestant in a completely unremarkable outing. As time continued to pass and the next decade dawned, he attacked a group of younger children and assaulted 2 of them, while holding the rest at gunpoint. They will provide a description of him, which would later be compared to his appearance on the TV show to prove that it matched his appearance at the time. By 1998, as the robberies continued, authorities suspected that Cooper was the man behind at least 30 separate instances of burglary. When he was arrested, police found that he had more than 500 keys in his possession at his home, which they suspected were trophies from his multiple escapades, as well as specific valuables and items that had been taken in a number of crimes they were looking into. He was put on trial and sentenced to 14 to 16 years in jail. When he was released on license in 2009, police began to look into some of these cold cases from the 80s, and with modern DNA and forensic techniques, he was linked to 2 double murders and the assault of a group of youths. His shotgun was also linked to the same crimes. Rearrested, he would be put on trial and given 4 life sentences, as well as being subject to a whole life order, meaning he will never be set free. John Cooper denies his involvement in these crimes, but the evidence appears to be airtight. Given the heinous and widespread nature of his crimes, he has had his name linked, at least informally, with any number of other famous unsolved murders in the area, but no concrete evidence has ever emerged to really tie him to them. Jeopardy is a long-running TV show where 3 contestants compete against each other in order to win money, famous for its format where they are given answers and must respond within a question that will fulfill the answer. It's one of the longest-running series in US game show history. Starting in 1964, it's been presented in a number of formats and on various different networks and companies. The most famous host, and the one most people associate with it, was Alex Trebek, who hosted from 1984 up until his death in 2020. There have been a number of notable contestants over the thousands of episodes that have been filmed and broadcast over the years. Some have racked up substantial prize pots over the course of multiple episodes, but one winner, while he might not have been the most successful in terms of cash, would end up being known for something a lot darker than a decent run on a TV show. After winning a 5-figure sum on the show, Paul Curry would meet Linda Kincaid at the nuclear power plant where they both worked in March of 1989, and despite a 13-year age gap, the two fell in love and would get married 3 years later. But, as often seems to be the case, the warning signs appeared early. Firstly, Paul was very insistent that all the major documentation, including insurances and mortgages, were made in his name. Secondly, and slightly more worryingly, he insisted that he was able to take out a $1 million life insurance policy on his new wife. Not long after this, Linda discovered that all about Paul's past was not as it seemed. He had been married twice before and had a child that he had been paying child support for. For his part, he apologized for keeping the truth from her, and it seemed as though the couple made up and went on a cruise together shortly after. However, they would both fall ill on the cruise, with Linda faring much worse and eventually requiring hospitalization. There were no obvious causes of her strange and seemingly worsening symptoms, and despite testing for anything they could, the doctors were stumped. After a lengthy stay, however, Linda was well enough to make it home from hospital, albeit having lost a substantial amount of weight. She would recover at home under the care of her doting husband, but the same mysterious symptoms re-emerged at the very end of 1993, and she was soon confined to a hospital bed again. This time during her stay, the nurses noted that there was an issue with her IV bag, as though it's been tampered with. Suspecting some form of deliberate poisoning, an investigation was started, and authorities were informed. When they asked her if anyone would want her dead, she stated that the only person would be her husband, but he would never do that. Similar to the previous time, her symptoms began to subside, just as oddly as they arrived, and without any clear indication of cause, and no grounds to hold her any longer, she was released back home. Those around her by this point started to become very concerned about these mysterious ongoing illnesses that seemed to have tanked her health, and there was a notable divide, with some of her friends starting to suspect Paul was behind it all. On June 9th, 1994, Linda Kincaid would die after suffering the same mysterious sudden illness, and despite the cloud of suspicion from her friends, no solid evidence emerged, so Paul was able to collect the life insurance policy with little issue. And for the next 8 years, no official suspicions were raised until the situation was reviewed as a cold case. The authorities started looking into Linda's statements on tape when the initial investigation was ongoing and noted her reference to Paul as the only one who could have motive to harm her. They also started to uncover discrepancies in his own past, such as not having earned the degree that he had worked at a number of nuclear facilities with, and noticing some odd parallels when speaking to one of his ex-wives. She had suffered similar unexplained illnesses with near identical symptoms, but when she resisted his suggestions to take out a life insurance policy on her, they separated, and she made a full recovery. This led her to look into her post-mortem, where elevated nicotine levels were noted, despite Linda being a non-smoker. There was also a pinprick behind her ear. What they suggested was that Paul had been spiking her food with tobacco without her knowledge, making her ill with excessively high intake of nicotine, and that her death was caused when she had taken ambient, and he had used the opportunity to inject a lethal dose of nicotine into her behind her ear. He was arrested and went to trial on September 11th, 2014, and less than 3 weeks later was convicted of killing his wife. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, Paul Curry will never live as a free man again. Family Feud is a team-based TV show where members of families compete against each other for the chance to win money and prizes. The questions posed are based on answers to a survey, where if the contestant guesses an answer that appeared as a response, they are awarded with the amount of points equivalent to the number of people that provided that response. Known for its colourful characters and probably more the humorous or outrageous answers given at times, both incorrect and not, it has been a TV staple for years. When Tim Bleefnick appeared on the show with his family, there was nothing to indicate that anything was amiss, but one of the answers that he gave to a question may have raised a few eyebrows. When asking about one of the worst mistakes that someone can make at a wedding, he replied,
"Honey, I love you, but said I do."
It may have been closer to the truth than anyone realised. That episode was filmed in the fall of 2019, and less than 4 years later, on February 23, 2023, Becky Bleefnick would be found dead on her bathroom floor. The 41-year-old mother of three had been shot 14 times and left to bleed out. Tim and Becky had tied the knot in 2009, but as the years passed and they began to raise a family together, issues began to emerge. Not long after the episode had been filmed in 2019, by the next year, their relationship was on the rocks. They had separated and each of them had applied for protective orders against the other. Tim applied for his in September of 2021, not long after officially filing for divorce. Becky also applied for one, with each of them accusing the other of various forms and degrees of harassment. Becky claimed that, amongst other things, he had cut down her favourite tree out of spite to punish her. While no physical abuse was mentioned, she stated that he had subjected her to long-term psychological abuse and behaved in a controlling manner towards her. She had texted her sister at least once to state that she was scared of Tim and what he might do. Both protective orders were denied, with the presiding judge appearing to view them as, quote, tit-for-tat submissions that were being weaponized by both parties to use as leverage in the upcoming divorce. This supposition would sadly prove to be fatal. Only a few months before her murder, Becky applied for a second protective order, this time to keep Tim's father away from the three children. She had heard of allegations within the family that his father had been accused of sexual misconduct and wanted to have a legal way of ensuring he was kept away. This too was initially dismissed due to lack of proof, and the divorce proceedings continued. However, the relatives that had accused Tim's father of abuse agreed to give evidence and was scheduled to do so in a hearing on February 24, 2023. The day before this, Tim broke into Becky's home, shot her multiple times, and then left her for dead. He was arrested and put on trial. During the trial, all of the allegations that Becky made against him were painted by the defense to have been untrue and fabrications, attempts at what they called, quote, point scoring, and nothing more than fantasies and lies to try and gain the upper hand in the divorce. Tim himself claimed that he had, quote, moved on and bore Becky no ill will. A jury of his peers disagreed, and he was found guilty of first-degree murder on August 11, 2023. After a 3-month trial, sentenced to life in prison, he still maintains his innocence to this day. In all of the other examples we've looked at today, either the person had not committed their crimes yet, or if they had, the extent of what they had done was not known to the audience at the time. Sifa Kalanak, a Turkish man, is about to break this trend. He appeared on a show called Luck of the Draw on Flash TV in Turkey. Aged 62 at the time of the broadcast in May of 2014, he was looking for love. His interview with the host was both very honest and a little unsettling. In it, he admitted that he had been released from prison after serving sentences for killing not only his first wife, but also later a second romantic partner. At the age of 17, he and his first wife had gotten married, but after less than a year, he said that her behavior changed and he became irritated with her. He would end up taking her life and be arrested and sent to prison for it. Having served 4.5 years of a 14-year sentence, he was released early in what news reports describe as, quote, an amnesty. This appears to have been an effort to ease overcrowding. His next relationship appeared happier, getting married and raising 2 children together before separating, this time without any deadly consequence, but it was not to last. He became romantically involved with a woman who was already married and had promised to leave her husband for him when she refused to follow through with this, according to Sifa. Whether she refused to follow through with this or not, according to Sifa, they quarreled and she attacked him. Here is how he described what happened. He said, quote, she was accidentally killed when I swung the axe. He was arrested again and sent back to jail, this time serving just under 10 years or 6. Some reports state 6. He himself says he spent a total of 14 years in jail, so slightly less than 10 might be closer. Either way, the host was horrified and asked him to leave the set. The incident caused complaints, with the production company being told they should have vetted him more. Some sources claim they admit not vetting enough, and others state that he was approved to go on regardless because he had served his legal sentences. Being interviewed after the show, he stated that his intention was just to be fully honest and upfront, because revealing the information later has led to women leaving him when they found out. He also swore not to kill any new potential partners. Whether this last statement was made in jest or sincerity is hard to judge. And that's the end of the video, folks. I'd like to thank all of my patrons for their continued support, especially those whose names you're seeing on screen now, particularly Sonny Hauser, Charlie Boyle, Bailey Cosmic Black Metal 96, Mimi, Pizza Guy 111, Light into Sunlight, KJ Musical, Losanna, Brandon Field, Helen Korn, Kyle, BAN, Brendan O'Connell, Adam Clayton, Count Ligula, Danny Jade, Paul Mendoza, Alex Christmas, Bella Schwartz, Belle Siegel, Stimulate, Inquis Cesarius, and Dick the Cock Johnson and the Woodmaster of WrestleMania 69 or Maybe Not Dude. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.